Morning, welcome back class. This is our video on The Outsiders for week 3. Sorry, didn't do anything to the hair, but let's talk about The Outsiders. This week you have chapters 3, 4, and 5 to read. So again, if you didn't read chapter 3 last week, you're reading it this week. The audiobooks will be there as well. They're just on YouTube. If you don't like the reader, feel free to find a new reader. As long as you make sure you've got the right book. Okay, things I want you to consider before we get into chapter 3 are labels. Labels are something we use to group people, to organize them, this is, you are this, so you should go over here. You are this, you should go over there. Think about what some of the labels we use are. Okay, and I obviously not in a classroom setting, so I can't call on you, but think about it for a moment. Okay, so different labels. My days, we might call someone a prep, the nerd, a jock, a gamer. Okay, labels are ways of defining someone by their family or their culture, how much money they have, what's their preferences on who they're attracted to, how they choose to dress, how they choose to spend their time, their free time. Those are different ways that we choose to label people. Okay, and if we can spend an entire class period discussing how we label people. Okay, and this is something we see in the book The Outsiders, as we have the Greasers and the Socs. Both groups have a label, and there's expectations to how that defines them, that this is what they're all going to be in this category or they're all going to be here. So, just as an example, when I was in school, gamers were nerds. If the only people really doing any, gaming were nerdier kids. If you were a jock, you weren't a gamer, you went out and played your games. Your physical games, the nerds stayed in and played on their computer because they weren't athletic. And so that was a weird thing for some people to acknowledge. I love video games. I love sports games. I did not fit into either nerd nor jock. I was definitely athletic, but I also loved to read and I loved to play video games. So how do you define that label? So things to consider as we read it. How do labels define us? Do they really define us? Okay? It's kind of like the idea of people want to say, if you're born under this month, then here's your personality traits. Everybody apparently born under a certain star sign are all defined with the same personality traits. It's kind of the same thing. How does that work? How can a label totally encompass someone, and how does it define someone? Okay, and the reason I bring this up, as we're going into chapter 3, what we've already seen between the Socs and the Greasers, Ponyboy and Cherry are starting to learn about where they are, how they are alike. They are learning how they both have problems. They may not be the same problem, but they both have problems. So pay attention to what they are learning and how Greasers and Socs are alike. Okay, so that's what we're going through with chapter 3. Learn how they're alike. Also, as we go, think about how they're different, especially when we start seeing material items. They come up as something of symbols. Material items are the physical items. What do the Greasers have? What do the Socs have? How do they define them differently? Things like cars, we're going to see that, or rings. Those are the things that define them, that separate them. And how? Why do they separate them? Okay, so just pay attention to that. Look for that. And now, as we go into chapters 4 and 5, I don't want to give any spoilers. I don't want to give anything away. Okay? It starts to get interesting, and I want to definitely avoid spoilers for you guys. But I want you to consider, as you read 4 and 5, how do Johnny and Ponyboy change? Okay? How did their personalities change? Do they change? How do their appearances change? Do they change their appearance? how's their importance in the gang change? Okay, so chapters 4 and 5 are going to bring on a period in which we're going to see change in both Johnny and Ponyboy. Okay, so pay attention to that. Outside of that, I will say I added in a question to each chapter. So you didn't have to do it in chapters 1 and 2, but it is starting chapters 3 on. The last question of each section is going to ask you, how would you title the chapter? So when you're reading the chapter, think about it. Think about what goes on in the chapter or any themes in the chapter. How would you title it? Because we see the chapters are just chapter 1, chapter 2. They don't actually have a title, but how would you title them? Okay, so think about that as you read it. That's a new question at the end of every chapter. How would you title this chapter and why? Okay, that's it for this week. Enjoy reading it. It's a good book, and I will talk to you later.